They told me my daughter had 3 days left to live. The hospital room felt cold enough to freeze time, but the clock kept ticking. While I held her hand, her husband stood by the window. He was not grieving. He was checking his watch. Then I saw a smile ghost across his face as he whispered into his phone about an investment arriving. He thought I was invisible. That was his first mistake. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I am 54 years old. And for the last 6 years, I have lived a life defined by its quietness. Since my husband passed, I have become invisible to the world. I am the woman you pass in the grocery store aisle without seeing. I am the shadow in the corner of the waiting room. People assume that because I am a widow who wears sensible shoes and speaks softly, I am weak. They assume my mind has slowed down along with my gait. They are wrong. The doctor stood at the foot of the bed and delivered the sentence. 3 days. That was the timeline. My daughter, Rachel Whitmore, had 72 hours left before her heart would supposedly stop beating. The hospital room was a sterile box of white and grey. The air smelled of aggressive antiseptic and the metallic tang of dried blood. It was freezing. I pulled my knit cardigan tighter around my shoulders, but the cold was not coming from the vents. It was radiating from the bed, where my only child lay unconscious. The machinery was the only thing alive in the room. The heart monitor beeped with a terrifying regularity. Beep, silence, beep. It felt less like a rhythm of life and more like a countdown clock. "We are doing everything we can to make her comfortable," the doctor said. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Daniel. I stood up, my knees cracking slightly. "Doctor, what about the toxin levels you said yesterday they were stabilizing?" The doctor blinked, shifting his weight. He glanced at Daniel before answering me. It was a micro-interaction, a split second of deference that told me everything about my standing in this room. Daniel Cross stepped between me and the doctor. He was Rachel's husband, a man of 40 with a jawline that seemed carved from expensive granite. He was wearing a charcoal suit, perfectly pressed. At 3 a.m. Who wears a suit to watch their wife die, Eleanor? "Please," Daniel said. His voice was a low baritone, practiced and smooth. He placed a hand on my shoulder. His palm felt hot and heavy. "Do not harass the doctor. You are distraught. Let me handle the medical decisions. You just sit with her." I looked at his hand on my shoulder, then up at his face. His eyes were dry, clear, focused. "I am not distraught. Daniel," I said. "I am her mother." "I know," he said, his tone condescending, like he was speaking to a confused child. "But the stress is too much for you. Go sit down." I sat, not because I obeyed him, but because I needed to watch him from a distance. The doctor left, and the room settled back into its mechanical hum. Daniel walked to the window. He stared out at the parking lot lights below. In the reflection of the glass, I saw his face. He thought I was weeping into my hands. I was not. I was watching through the gaps between my fingers. For a brief moment, his neutral expression broke. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. It was a smile. It was not a sad smile of reminiscence. It was the sharp, satisfied smile of a man who had just closed a lucrative business deal. It sent a shard of ice straight through my stomach. He pulled his phone from his pocket and stepped into the hallway. He left the door cracked open just an inch. He assumed the noise of the ventilator would drown him out. He assumed I was too old to hear. I leaned forward in the chair, straining my ears against the hum of the machines. No. The timeline is solid, Daniel whispered into the phone. The doctor said 3 days max. The investment? Yes. It clears once the death certificate is filed. I have the lawyer ready. The words hung in the sterile air. Investment. Clears. Death certificate. My daughter was fighting for every breath, her chest rising and falling with agonizing effort. And her husband was in the hallway, calculating the payout. I looked at Rachel's pale face, her eyelids fluttering in her coma. Everyone thought she was tragically sick. Everyone thought Daniel was the stoic, grieving husband. I gripped the armrests of the plastic chair until my knuckles turned white. They thought I was just Eleanor Whitmore, the invisible widow. But as I watched Daniel walk back into the room, checking his watch with an air of impatience, I realized something. He was not waiting for her to die. He was waiting for a transaction to complete. He sat down opposite me and sighed, a perfect performance of exhaustion. It will be over soon. Eleanor? He said. Yes, I replied, my voice steady. It will. He did not hear the threat in my voice. He only heard the surrender. That was his second mistake. The waiting room was a purgatory of beige walls and old magazines. I watched Daniel from my seat in the corner. A grieving husband should look unraveled. He should have red eyes or a tie that was loosened in frustration. Daniel looked like he was waiting for a delayed flight, annoyance rather than anguish etching his features. He sat with one leg crossed over the other, typing on his phone with a rhythmic, casual precision that made my stomach turn. He was not panicked. He was managing a schedule. He stood up immediately when Dr. Evans walked past the nurse's station. I stood up too, my joints protesting. But Daniel was faster. He stepped in front of me, his broad back acting as a wall between me and the physician. Doctor, Daniel said, his voice low and professional. Have the discharge papers, or rather, the final processing forms been prepared. I want to ensure there are no administrative delays when the time comes. He was not asking if she was in pain. He was not asking if there was a new treatment to try. He was asking about paperwork. He was clearing the runway. I looked past his shoulder at the glass partition. Rachel lay there, a tangle of tubes and wires. She was so still. It was a stillness that felt unnatural, imposed by the steady drip of the IV bag. She could not speak to tell me she was afraid. She could not squeeze my hand. She was a hostage in her own body, and her voice had been stolen by the sedatives Daniel insisted were for her comfort. We are monitoring her. Mr. Cross, the doctor replied, looking at his clipboard. But as we discussed, her directives are quite specific about limited intervention. Limited intervention. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Later, when Daniel went to the cafeteria to get coffee for himself, never offering me any, I cornered a young nurse near the station. She looked tired, her eyes dark with fatigue. Excuse me, I said softly, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. My daughter. Why aren't we trying the dialysis again? Her kidneys were functioning last week. The nurse looked at her computer screen, then at me, confused. Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Cross declined the dialysis. He signed the waiver this morning, along with the other forms. What other forms, I asked. She hesitated, realizing perhaps she had said too much to the wrong person. The rapid estate settlement authorization and the updated power of attorney. She stammered, lowering her voice. He said it was what Rachel wanted to save the family stress. He has been signing documents all morning. I felt the blood drain from my face. Rapid estate settlement. My daughter was still warm. Her heart was still beating. And he was already liquidating her existence. He was not just prepared for her death. He was expediting the administrative aftermath. I sat back down before my legs gave out. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was not in a hospital. I was in our old kitchen, 20 years ago. Rachel was 7. She had woken up from a nightmare, sobbing about monsters in the closet. I had held her, rocking her back and forth while the thunder rattled the window panes. "Mommy, don't let them get me," she had cried. "I won't." I had whispered into her hair, fierce and absolute. "I will stand between you and the monsters. Always." I opened my eyes. The monster was not in the closet anymore. He was walking back down the hallway, holding a steaming cup of coffee and checking his watch again. He looked at me and offered a tight, pitying grimace that did not reach his eyes. "You should go home. Eleanor," he said. "Get some rest. I will handle everything here. There is nothing you can do." He wanted me gone. He wanted the only witness to his efficiency to leave the building so he could finish his work in peace. I looked at my hands. They were wrinkled, the skin paper thin, but they were not shaking anymore. He saw an old woman. He saw a nuisance. He did not see the mother who had promised to fight the monsters. "No," I said, my voice harder than he expected. "I am staying." I was done crying. If Daniel wanted to treat my daughter's life like a business transaction, then I would have to audit the books. I would not just sit and wait for the end. I was going to find out why the ledger did not balance. Daniel made a mistake. He assumed his briefcase was safe, sitting on the plastic chair next to his coat. He assumed I was too busy staring at the heart monitor to notice the world outside the bed. When he stepped out to take a call another associate who was likely a creditor, I moved. I did not move like an old woman. I moved like a predator. I opened the leather flap. Inside, beneath a stack of glossy real estate brochures, was a thick manila envelope. The label read, "Life Assurance, Policy Number 492. I pulled it out, my hands trembling not from age but from adrenaline. I flipped through the pages. The numbers were staggering. $5 million. I read the beneficiary line. Daniel Cross. Then I looked at the date. October 12th. My breath hitched in my throat. October 12th was exactly 3 weeks before Rachel started complaining about headaches. It was 1 month before she collapsed in the kitchen. The timing was not a coincidence. It was a schedule. I scanned the fine print, my eyes darting across the legal jargon until I found the clause that made my blood freeze. Accelerated Death Benefit Rider. It stated that if the insured passed away within 90 days of the diagnosis of a terminal condition, the payout would be expedited to within 10 business days. He was not just betting on her death. He was betting on a fast death. I shoved the papers back into the envelope and returned the briefcase to its original position just as the elevator dinged down the hall. I needed help. I needed someone who could read between these lines of legal murder. I retreated to the fire exit stairwell, the only place where the hospital silence was broken by the distant hum of traffic. I dialed the number for Hawthorne and Bly Legal Group, a firm my late husband used to speak of with respect. A secretary connected me to a senior partner, Mr. Bly. I spoke fast. I told him everything. The timeline, the policy, the smile. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mr. Bly said, his voice crackling slightly over the line. "You have to listen to me very carefully. What you are describing is circumstantial. Obtaining a policy before an illness is not illegal. In fact, he will argue it was prudent planning. Prudent, I hissed into the phone. He took out a policy for $5 million, and 3 weeks later she is dying. That is not planning. That is a script. I know how it looks. Mr. Bly replied, his tone grave. But proving intent to kill or negligence to collect insurance is an incredibly high bar. If he has medical documentation supporting natural causes, and if he has power of attorney, we are fighting a ghost. He is rushing the end. I said. He denied dialysis. He is pushing for hospice care starting tomorrow morning. There was a long pause on the other end. If she dies on his timeline, Mr. Bly said slowly, the autopsy will likely be waived if the attending physician signs off on natural causes. Once she is cremated, the evidence is gone, the money transfers, and he walks away, a rich widower. I leaned my head against the cold concrete wall. The stairwell felt like a vertical coffin. So you are saying I have no case? I said. I am saying, Mr. Bly corrected, that we cannot fight this in a courtroom next year. We have to fight it in that hospital room right now. You need to find something that proves he manipulated her condition, not just her finances. You need a smoking gun. Eleanor. And you need it before her heart stops. I hung up the phone. The logic was cold, hard, and undeniable. Daniel had built a perfect cage of paper and laws. He had the doctors convinced. He had the lawyers satisfied. He had the money waiting. I opened the heavy metal door and walked back into the sterile hallway. I saw Daniel standing near the nurse's station, laughing softly at something on his phone. He looked like a man who had already won. He did not know that I was done grieving. I walked past him, my face a mask of stone. I was not going back into that room to say goodbye. I was going back in there to find the smoking gun. I watched Daniel charm the charge nurse at the station. He tilted his head at just the right angle, offering a sympathetic smile that suggested he was the one needing comfort, not the man waiting for a payout. It was the same smile he had worn the first time I met him, 5 years ago. He had come to dinner wearing a suit that cost more than my car, holding a bottle of vintage red wine. He had pulled out my chair. He had complimented my pot roast. He had been perfect. Too perfect. I remembered pulling Rachel into the kitchen that night while he was admiring my late husband's coin collection in the living room. He is a bit smooth, isn't he? I had asked, trying to keep my voice light. Rachel had stiffened, her eyes narrowing in defense. He is a gentleman. Mom. Just because you are used to men who give up does not mean Daniel is fake. He loves me. I just get a feeling that he is performing. I had said, regretting the words the moment they left my mouth. Stop it. She had snapped. Do not ruin this for me. I am finally happy. So I stopped. I swallowed my doubts. I bit my tongue when he isolated her from her high school friends. I looked the other way when he took over her finances. I convinced myself that I was just a bitter old widow who had forgotten what romance looked like. I let my fear of losing my daughter silence my instincts. Now, looking at Rachel's grey, shallow face against the white pillow, that silence felt like a noose. I had failed her. I had let the wolf into the henhouse because I was too afraid to close the door. The guilt washed over me, hot and suffocating, but I could not drown in it. Not yet. I remembered the last time Rachel visited my house, 2 months ago. She had been jittery, jumping at the sound of the kettle whistling, before she left. She had pressed a thick blue folder into my hands. "Keep this safe for me, Mom," she had said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just in case. In case of what I had asked. Just in case." She had insisted, her grip on my arm bruising. "Don't open it unless you have to." I had buried that folder at the bottom of my oversized tote bag, the one I carried everywhere, buried under knitting needles and spare reading glasses. I had forgotten it until this very moment. I retreated to the bathroom in the lobby, locking the stall door behind me. My hands shook as I dug through the bag. I felt the cool, smooth cardboard of the folder. I pulled it out. I sat on the closed toilet lid and opened it. The first few pages were printouts of emails. They were from Daniel to a private account, discussing debts, gambling debts, huge sums, $50,000, $80,000. Then there were medical notes in Rachel's handwriting. September 4th, migraine again, vision blurry. But it was the last item that made me cover my mouth to stifle a scream. It was a page torn from her personal journal, dated 6 weeks ago. "He made me tea again tonight. He insisted I drink it all before bed. It tasted bitter, like metal. I pretended to sip it, but poured it into the plant pot when he went to the bathroom. The plant died the next morning. I am scared. I think he is trying to hurt me, but who would believe me? Everyone thinks he is a saint." Tears blurred my vision, but I wiped them away furiously. Rachel had not just been sick, she had been poisoned, and she knew it. She had been living in terror in her own home, sleeping next to a man who was slowly killing her, and she had been brave enough to document it. She had left me breadcrumbs. She had given me the weapon I needed. I shoved the papers back into the folder and hid it deep inside my bag. I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror. The tired, helpless old woman was gone. In her place was a mother who had just found out her child was murdered by the man sitting in the waiting room. I unlocked the door. I was not going to cry anymore. I was going to war. Mr. Bly arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after my call. We met in the small, dim chapel on the first floor, a place where people usually went to bargain with God. I was there to bargain with the law. I spread the documents from Rachel's secret folder onto the pew between us. Mr. Bly, a man who had spent 40 years dissecting lies, put on his reading glasses and leaned in close. "Look at this," I whispered, pointing to the beneficiary change form dated 2 months ago. Rachel has a tremor in her right hand. It started last year. Her handwriting is shaky and small. This signature is bold. It is smooth. Mr. Bly compared the signature to the medical consent form Rachel had signed upon admission. He frowned, the lines on his forehead deepening. "It is a forgery," he said, his voice quiet but sharp. "And a bad one." He must have signed it thinking no one would ever audit the file. But Eleanor, proving this in court takes weeks. We do not have weeks. We have hours. We heard footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. I quickly swept the papers back into my bag. Daniel appeared in the doorway of the chapel. He was not looking for solace. He was looking for me. For the first time. His expression was not one of performative grief. It was tight with suspicion. He looked at Mr. Bly, then at me. He realized I was not crying. He realized I was not alone. "I was wondering where you went," Daniel said, stepping into the room. His presence filled the small space with a suffocating tension. "And who is this?" "This is an old friend of my late husband." I lied, my voice steady. He came to pray with me. Daniel did not believe me. I saw his eyes flick to my bag. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. You seem very energetic for a grieving mother. Eleanor, he said. I hope you are not confusing yourself with conspiracy theories. Grief does strange things to the mind. I just want to understand. Daniel, I said. There is nothing to understand, he snapped, his mask slipping further. She is dying. The doctor said 3 days. We are now down to 2. Time is not on our side. You need to accept that. Time is running out, he repeated, almost to himself, and the corner of his lip curled up. It was a sneer. He was mocking my hope. He was mocking her life. I knew I had to pivot. If he thought I was a threat, he would block access to the room entirely. I slumped my shoulders. I let my face fall into lines of exhaustion. I reached out and touched his arm, forcing myself not to recoil at the contact. I know. Daniel, I said, making my voice tremble. I am just so scared. I do not want her to be in pain. Please. I am just a useless old woman who does not know how to say goodbye. Daniel paused. He scanned my face, looking for the steel he had glimpsed earlier. I hid it well. I gave him the broken mother he wanted to see. It is okay. Eleanor, he said, his voice softening into that patronizing tone again. I am handling it. You just rest. He walked away, satisfied that he was still the smartest person in the building. He was wrong. 30 minutes later, Mr. Bly made a call. He did not call a judge. He called Dr. Sterling, a forensic pathologist who owed the firm a favor. We walked into the ICU together. Daniel was in the cafeteria, likely transferring funds or celebrating prematurely. Dr. Sterling did not touch Rachel. He stood at the foot of the bed and read the chart. He flipped through the pages of blood work from the last week. He looked at the monitors. He looked at the IV drip. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Sterling said, his voice low. Who ordered the increase in potassium yesterday? The attending physician. I assume, I said. No, Dr. Sterling said, tapping the plastic clipboard. The attending physician ordered a decrease, but the administration log shows an increase. And look at the toxin screen from admission versus today. The levels are not dropping despite the dialysis being stopped. They are rising. I felt the room spin. What are you saying? I am saying that this does not look like natural liver failure, Dr. Sterling said, turning to face me with a grim expression. It looks like continuous poisoning. Someone is still dosing her. My knees gave out, and Mr. Bly caught me. It was not just a past crime. It was happening right now. Every time Daniel was alone in this room, he was not holding her hand. He was finishing the job. We need to lock this room down, Mr. Bly said, pulling out his phone. Now. But before he could dial, the door opened. Daniel stood there, holding a coffee cup. He looked at Dr. Sterling, then at the open chart, and finally at me. The smile was gone completely. What is going on here? Daniel asked, his voice cold as ice. I straightened up. I was done acting. We are getting a second opinion. Daniel, I said, and it seems the investment you are waiting for is going to be delayed. Dr. Sterling lowered the chart and looked at me with eyes that had seen too much death to be easily shocked. Yet he looked shaken. He pulled me into the corner of the room, away from the glass partition where Daniel was pacing like a caged tiger. She is not dying. Eleanor, Doctor, Sterling whispered, the intensity of his voice cutting through the hum of the ventilation. At least, she does not have to. The organ failure is acute, not chronic. It is reversible. The reason she is fading is because the support she needs was stopped. Someone convinced the medical team that her condition was terminal to justify withholding the dialysis. I stared at him, my hands gripping the cold metal railing of the bed frame. The room seemed to tilt. My daughter was not fighting a disease. She was fighting a script. Daniel had not just planned for her death. He had engineered the timeline. He had placed a bet on her life, wagering that she would expire within 3 days, and he was actively ensuring the house won. So, if we treat her now, I asked, my voice barely audible, if we restart the filtration and administer the counteragents immediately. Dr. Sterling said firmly. She wakes up. It will be hard, but she survives. Survives. The word tasted like oxygen. Before I could respond, the door swung open. Daniel walked in, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from clinical hope to suffocating dread. He was holding a clipboard. He did not look at Dr. Sterling. He looked only at me, his eyes dark and impatient. The hospital administrator gave me the final forms, Daniel said, thrusting the clipboard toward me. It is the transfer to hospice care. They want to move her within 2 hours. We need to sign this to stop the unnecessary interventions. Let her have peace. Eleanor? I looked at the paper. It was not a request for peace. It was a permission slip for murder. If I signed that, she would be moved to a facility where they would only give her morphine until her heart stopped. I slipped my hand into my cardigan pocket and pressed the record button on my phone. I had practiced this with Mr. Bly just 10 minutes ago in the hallway. Daniel? I said, forcing a tremor into my voice that I no longer felt. Are you sure the new doctor? He thinks maybe there is a chance. Daniel sighed, a sound of exaggerated frustration. He stepped closer, looming over me. Eleanor. Look at her, he said, gesturing to Rachel's pale form. She is in agony. Do you want to prolong that? Do you want to be the reason she suffers for another week just because you cannot let go? That is selfish. The investment, the arrangements are already made. He had slipped. He had said investment. What did you say? I asked, widening my eyes innocently. What arrangements? The funeral home, he corrected quickly, though a bead of sweat appeared on his temple. The arrangements for her rest. Please? Eleanor. Sign the papers. Do it for Rachel. If you do not sign, the insurance might not cover the hospice, and we will be left with nothing. I need a moment. I stammered. I cannot hold the pen. My hands are shaking too much. I turned away, shielding the phone in my pocket. I felt the vibration of a text message coming in. It was from Mr. Bly, who was listening from the security room where he had charmed the guards. I heard him. We have the admission of financial motive. Do not sign. Stall him. I turned back to Daniel. He was tapping the pen against the clipboard, the rhythm fast and aggressive. I will sign. Daniel? I lied. But I cannot do it here. It feels wrong. Let us do it tomorrow morning, when the sun is up. I want to say goodbye to her tonight properly. Daniel's jaw tightened. He looked at his watch. He was calculating the hours. He needed her dead by the weekend to maximize the payout clause. Fine, he hissed, his voice dropping the facade of kindness completely. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. No later, or I will have you removed from this hospital for causing distress." He threw the clipboard onto the chair and stormed out of the room. He thought he had bullied an old woman into submission. He thought he had won another 12 hours of silence. I watched the door close, and my spine straightened. I touched Rachel's hand. It was still warm. "Hold on, baby," I whispered to her. "Just one more night." I was not going to sign those papers. Tomorrow morning, I was not bringing a pen. I was bringing the entire truth, and I was going to drop it on him like a guillotine. The trap was set. Now, we just had to wait for him to step into it. The sun rose over the hospital parking lot at 7 o'clock sharp, casting long, pale shadows across the linoleum floor of the waiting area. I had not slept. I sat in the same plastic chair, my hands folded in my lap, watching the hallway like a hawk watching a field for movement. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later. He looked refreshed. He had shaved. His suit was pressed, and he carried a cup of coffee that smelled of expensive roast. There was a bounce in his step that turned my stomach. He did not look like a man preparing to sign his wife into hospice care. He looked like a man preparing to close on a beach house. He stopped near the vending machines, his phone pressed to his ear. He did not see me sitting in the alcove. He thought he was alone. "Yes, I know," Daniel said into the phone, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet corridor. He laughed, a short, sharp sound of victory. "The agent confirmed it this morning. The payout is triggered upon transfer to palliative care. It is done." He paused, listening to the person on the other end, and then he smiled. It was not the polite smile he showed the doctors. It was a predator's grin, wide and hungry. "Finally," he whispered. But in the silence of the hospital, it sounded like a shout. "Finally. The investment is ready to be harvested." I sat perfectly still. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I let those words burn themselves into my memory. The investment. My daughter was not a person to him. She was a stock option that had finally matured. He hung up the phone and adjusted his tie in the reflection of the glass door. He checked his teeth. He smoothed his hair. The arrogance radiating off him was almost physical. He believed he had navigated the maze. He believed the old woman in the cardigan was just a speed bump he had successfully flattened. I stood up. My joints ached, but I felt a cold, hard strength flowing through my veins. I walked out of the alcove. "Daniel," I said. He jumped slightly, then relaxed when he saw it was only me. "Eleanor," he said, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "You look terrible. Did you sleep at all?" "It is time." "Do you have the strength to do this?" "I do," I said softly. "I called the necessary people. They are waiting for us in the conference room down the hall. I thought it would be better to do the paperwork in private." "Good," he said, checking his watch. "Efficient. Let's get this over with so I can get back to Rachel." He walked ahead of me, his stride long and confident. He thought he was walking toward a notary and a signature line. He thought he was walking toward $5 million. He did not know he was walking into an execution. I followed him, my footsteps silent on the floor. I watched the back of his neck. I wondered if he felt the axe hanging over him. We reached the conference room door. Daniel reached for the handle, pausing to look back at me. "You are making the right choice." "Eleanor," he said. "It is what Rachel would have wanted." "We will see," I replied. He opened the door and strode in. expecting a table with a few forms. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. The room was full. Mr. Bly sat at the head of the table, his briefcase open, a stack of files spread out before him. Next to him sat Dr. Sterling, his arms crossed, his face grim. And at the far end of the table sat a woman in a sharp grey suit, the senior fraud investigator from the insurance company, whom Mr. Bly had called at 4 a.m. The air in the room was heavy, charged with the static of imminent violence. Daniel froze. His hand was still on the doorknob. He looked from the lawyer to the doctor, and then to the woman in the grey suit. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. "What is this?" Daniel asked, his voice losing its smooth polish. "Eleanor? I thought we were signing the hospice transfer." I walked past him and took the empty seat next to Mr. Bly. I placed my phone on the table. "We are not here to sign anything." "Daniel," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "we are here to talk about your investment." He blinked, and for the first time in 3 days, I saw the fear flicker behind his eyes. He knew. In that split second, the arrogance evaporated, replaced by the primal panic of a trapped animal. "Sit down, Mr. Cross, Mr. Bly said, his voice like a gavel striking wood. "We have a lot to discuss, and unfortunately for you, the time is not running out for Rachel anymore. It is running out for you." Daniel looked at the door, but he knew he could not run. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his movements stiff and jerky. The trap had snapped shut. I placed my hand on the stack of files Mr. Bly had prepared. I did not look at the papers. I looked at Daniel. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. He was trying to maintain his composure, but I saw the tremor in his fingers as he reached for his coffee cup. "Before we discuss hospice," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife, "we are going to listen to something." I pressed the play button on my phone. The volume was turned up to the maximum. Finally, "The investment is ready to be harvested." Daniel's voice filled the room, tinny and distorted but unmistakable. The arrogance in that recording was palpable. It echoed off the sterile walls. Daniel froze. The cup stopped halfway to his mouth. His face went from a healthy flush to the colour of old ash. He looked at the phone as if it were a bomb that had just detonated on the table. That is taken out of context," Daniel stammered. Standing up so quickly, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I was talking about a property deal. Eleanor, you are confused. You are twisting my words because you are grieving. Sit down, Mr. Cross," the woman in the grey suit said. She did not raise her voice, but the authority in her tone was absolute. "My name is Agent Vance. I represent the Special Investigations Unit for the insurer. We define an investment very differently than you do." "This is ridiculous," Daniel shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is senile. She is distraught. My wife is dying in the next room, and you are harassing me. She is not dying." "Dr. Sterling interrupted. He stood up and threw a new medical report onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "We ran a new toxicology screen this morning, independent of the hospital lab you have been using. The results are clear. Rachel is not suffering from spontaneous organ failure. She is suffering from prolonged exposure to heavy metals. Exposure that stopped the moment you were banned from her room 3 hours ago." Daniel's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The air seemed to leave his lungs. Her kidney function has improved by 15% since this morning. Dr. Sterling continued, his voice hard. She is going to live. Daniel. And she is going to talk. The policy is suspended immediately, Agent Vance added, making a note in her ledger. We are opening a formal fraud investigation. If you attempt to leave the state, we will have a warrant issued before you reach the airport. Daniel looked around the room. He realized there was no exit. The walls he had built were crashing down on him. You set me up. He hissed at me, his eyes wild. You old hag. You think anyone will believe you over me? I am her husband, and I am her mother. I replied calmly. Suddenly, the door to the conference room burst open. A nurse stood there, breathless and wide-eyed. Dr. Sterling, she gasped. Come quick. The patient. She is awake. The room erupted into motion. I ran faster than I had in 20 years. I ignored the burning in my chest and the ache in my knees. I reached the ICU room just as Daniel came skidding in behind me, trying to regain control of the narrative. Rachel was there. Her eyes were open. She looked small and fragile in the bed, the tubes still snaking around her like vines. But she was conscious. Her gaze drifted from the ceiling to me, and then it landed on Daniel. Daniel threw himself against the bedside rail, breathless, sweat dripping down his forehead. He forced a desperate, terrified smile onto his face. Rachel. Baby? He panted, reaching for her hand. Oh, thank God. I was so worried. I have been here the whole time. Rachel did not speak. She did not squeeze his hand. She pulled her fingers away from his grip as if his skin were acid. She looked at him. It was not the look of a confused patient waking from a coma. It was a look of absolute, terrifying clarity. It was the look of a woman who remembered the bitter tea. It was the look of a woman who remembered the smile he gave her when she fell. Get him out, Rachel whispered. Her voice was weak, barely a scratch in the air, but the hatred in it was strong enough to shatter glass. Daniel recoiled as if she had slapped him. He looked at me, then back at her, and for the first time, he realized that the investment had not just failed, it had turned against him. You heard her? I said, stepping between them, my voice trembling with rage. Get out. 2 uniformed officers arrived 20 minutes later. They did not drag Daniel out in handcuffs. Not yet. But the implication was clear when they asked him to step into the hallway for questioning regarding the insurance irregularities. He looked back at us once. He did not look like a mastermind anymore. He looked small. He looked like a man realizing that his suit was no longer armor, but a costume he was about to be stripped of. Rachel's voice was raspy when she turned her head toward Mr. Bly. I want him. I want him nowhere near me, she whispered, her throat raw from the ventilator tube that had been removed only an hour ago. We are filing for an emergency protection order immediately, Mr. Bly assured her, his pen scratching rapidly across a notepad. He will not step foot on this floor again. The hospital security has already been alerted. When the door finally closed, sealing us in a bubble of safety, I sat down. The plastic chair felt hard against my back. The adrenaline that had fueled me for 72 hours evaporated, leaving behind a profound, aching exhaustion. I put my head in my hands. And then, for the first time since this nightmare began, I wept. I did not cry like a victim. I cried like a soldier who had survived the trenches. I cried because the beep of the monitor was still there. Beep, beep, beep. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a future that Daniel had tried to sell, and I had bought it back. The days that followed were a blur of legal motions and medical procedures. The story did not explode on the news immediately. It spread like a contagion through the quiet, vicious whispers of high society. A sealed civil lawsuit has a way of leaking into the right ears. We heard from Mr. Bly that Daniel's reputation was collapsing in silence. His partners pulled out of deals. His accounts were frozen by the federal investigation. He was not just a criminal suspect, he was a pariah. He had lost the one thing he valued more than money, which was his standing. Rachel's recovery was not a montage of happy moments. It was brutal. It was ugly. Her kidneys were damaged, and her body was weak from weeks of systematic poisoning. There were nights she woke up screaming, thrashing in the sheets, thinking he was standing over her with that bitter cup of tea. "Mum, is he here? Did he come back?" She would gasp, her eyes wide with panic in the dim light. "You are safe," I would say, smoothing her sweat-dampened hair back from her forehead. "I am here. The locks are changed. The guards are outside. He can never hurt you again." One afternoon, while I was helping her sip beef broth, she looked at me with tears welling in her eyes. The shame in her expression broke my heart. "I am sorry. Mum," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I should have listened to you years ago. I was so stupid. I let him do this to me." "Hush," I said softly, placing the spoon down. "You were not stupid. You were in love. He used that against you. But you saw it in the end. You left the clues. You survived him. That is all that matters." We spent hours talking in that hospital room, rebuilding the bridge between us that Daniel had tried to burn down. We talked about her childhood. We talked about the garden we would plant when she got out. We did not talk about him. He did not deserve our words. I realized then that true revenge was not about making Daniel scream, though I knew the law would take care of that. Revenge was not about the court dates or the prison sentence that was surely coming. Revenge was sitting in this chair, watching the afternoon sunlight hit my daughter's face. Revenge was hearing her breathe without a machine. Revenge was stealing back the life he had tried to cash in. I looked at the calendar on the wall. It had been 7 days since the doctor gave her 3 days to live. We had beaten the clock. We had beaten him. And as I watched Rachel sleep, her chest rising and falling in a natural, unforced rhythm, I knew we had won the only war that counted. The final hearing was not the explosive courtroom drama that people see in movies. It was quiet. It was bureaucratic. It was lethal. The judge sat behind a high wooden bench and reviewed the mountain of evidence Mr. Bly and Agent Vance had assembled. The ruling was delivered with a monotone efficiency that made it all the more devastating. The insurance policy was declared void due to fraudulent inducement. The beneficiary status was revoked. Daniel stood on the other side of the aisle. He was not wearing his charcoal suit. He was wearing clothes that looked slept in. When the judge announced that his assets were being frozen pending the criminal trial, Daniel did not shout. He slumped. The empire he had built on leverage and lies collapsed in the span of 5 minutes. The real estate projects he had bragged about were no longer his future fortune. They were now evidence. As the bailiff moved to escort him out, Daniel turned to look at me. The arrogance was gone. The predator's grin was gone. In their place was a naked, desperate pleading. He looked at me as if he expected the kindly old woman he had known for 5 years to suddenly intervene. He expected Eleanor the pushover to save him from the consequences of his own greed. "Eleanor, please," he mouthed, the word soundless across the room. I looked at him. I did not frown. I did not scowl. I gave him absolutely nothing. I offered him a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. I watched him with the detached interest one might have for a bug trapped in a jar. He realized then that the woman he was looking at was not the mother-in-law he had manipulated. I was the architect of his ruin. I turned my back on him and walked out. Back at the hospital, the air felt different. It was no longer cold. The scent of antiseptic seemed to have faded, replaced by the smell of the fresh lilies I had bought that morning. Rachel was sitting up in bed. She was weak, but she was upright. Mr. Bly placed a document on the rolling tray table. It was the divorce petition. Rachel took the pen. Her hand shook, the aftershocks of the toxins still rattling her nervous system. But she did not hesitate. She pressed the tip of the pen to the paper and signed her name. It was not a perfect signature, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "It is done," Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. I am free." "You are," I said, kissing her forehead. "You are free." The 3 days that were supposed to be her death sentence had become her liberation. We packed her bag an hour later. We did not take everything. We left the flowers Daniel had bought. We left the get-well cards from his fake friends. We took only what mattered. I pushed Rachel's wheelchair toward the automatic doors of the hospital entrance. The afternoon sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the asphalt of the parking lot. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. It tasted like victory. I paused for a moment and looked back at the hospital building, somewhere in a holding cell. Daniel was realizing that his investment had indeed paid out, just not in the currency he expected. He had paid with his freedom. A small smile touched my lips. It was not a polite smile. It was not a grandmotherly smile. It was the sharp, satisfied smile of a woman who had walked through fire and dragged her child out alive. They had looked at my grey hair and my sensible shoes and assumed I was harmless. They were wrong. As I helped my daughter into the car, I thought about the lesson Daniel had learned too late. It is a lesson every predator should know before they hunt in a home protected by a parent. Never confuse the love of a mother with weakness. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am really curious to know where you guys are tuning in from right now, so please drop your city or country in the comments below, because I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Nora Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button so we can get this story out to even more people.